walking out of town, looking for a better place. Something's on my mind, always in my empty space. But I know someday I'll make it out of here, even if it takes all night. Oh, 100 years, need a place to hide, but I can't find one that wanna feel alive outside. I can't find my fear.
Isn't it lovely? All alone, heart made of glass, my mind of stone.
Tear me to pieces, skin and bone. Hello, welcome home. Hello, welcome home. Lately, I've been thinking. I want you to be happier. I want you to be happier.
Yeah, I know. I'm worried.
When the morning comes and we see what we've become. In the cold light of day, we're a flame in the wind, not the fire that we begun. Every argument, every word we can't take back. Cause with all that has happened, I think that we both know the way that the story ends. Then only for a minute, I want to change my mind. Cause this just don't feel right to me. I wanna raise your spirits, I want to see you smile, but no, that means
Welcome everyone to this afternoon's IPPR event on how transport can support the lives and livelihoods of the British public. My name is Becca Massey-Chase. I'm Head of Citizen Engagement at IPPR, which is the Institute for Public Policy Research. And we have a fantastic panel with us today. We'll be talking about transport, how we get around is part of all of our lives every day. It's the backbone of a thriving economy. It has great impact on what people can access, from work to services to family and well-being. And for many, it's also a key part of their household budgets and what they spend every day. This government's prioritised transport, particularly in committing to renationalising the railways and supporting bus franchising, but there are still a lot of challenges, and challenges for the transport sector overall, such as high emissions, road traffic accidents, and inequalities in provision across places and across people. Here today to discuss some of these opportunities and challenges, I've got an expert panel. Really pleased to welcome Liliane Greenwood MP, who's the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Department for Transport. Previously served as Minister for the Future of Roads, and she's the MP for Nottingham South. To her left is David Skaith. He's the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, elected in May 2024. He's the first person to serve in this role, and having grown up in Harrogate, he now lives just outside of York. And then finally, we have Dr. Maya Singer-Hobbs. Maya is a Senior Research Fellow at IPPR, based in the Economy and Environment team. Maya works on a variety of topics, including planning reform, transport decarbonisation, housing, clean air, many topics. I will be coming to each of my panellists for their opening remarks shortly, and then they'll each speak for around 5 minutes each. After that, we'll open up to the floor for questions, Finally, I'll come to them for their closing remarks, and we'll wrap everything up by 2:45. So without further ado, I'll move on to those opening remarks. So Lillian, I'd like to invite you to go first, please.
Thanks very much, Becca, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to be with you here today, and I have to say it's a bit of a homecoming for me after a year serving as the Minister for the Future of Roads. I'm really delighted to be back in DFT. They obviously couldn't cope without me, but I'm now serving as the Minister for Local Transport. One of my responsibilities is active travel, and probably like all of you, I kind of legged it over from the conference centre. You might notice I've got a rather nifty new footwear. Unfortunately, broke my ankle recently, which is not the ideal for the the Minister for active travel, but I'm kind of making the most of it. And I'm really pleased for the kind of conversation that we're having this afternoon, because I know how vital local transport and transport is to people's everyday lives. It's one of the things that I most like about doing transport policy, which, as Becca said, I've done for kind of most of the time that I've been in Parliament, is if you step outside your door in the morning, you are encountering our transport system. It doesn't matter whether you're a pedestrian or a cyclist or a bus passenger or a driver or a train passenger or jumping into a taxi or a private hire vehicle, you are encountering our transport system, and the ability to influence that, to make it, to improve it, to improve what it enables, because transport is about what it enables, not about the shiny objects with wheels. That's what I think is so good. So whether it is the bus that gets you to work, or the train that connects you to the family, or the footpath that makes walking to school safe and pleasant, local transport, it is the thread that ties our communities together. And as we've already heard, it is central to how we deliver on our missions for government. So let me start with the big picture. So since taking office last year, this government has committed £92 billion in capital investment in transport infrastructure. And I think that's a huge vote of confidence in the ability of transport to drive growth, to unlock opportunity, and to improve people's lives. We've backed our city regions, home to almost half of the country, with long-term funding settlements, £15.6 billion in the spending review period to the Transport for City Regions programme, and £2.3 billion to the Regional Transport Grant, which of course includes David's area, and we're investing in nationally significant infrastructure projects too, like East West Rail, like TransPennine route upgrade. But it's about so much more than concrete and steel. It's about creating jobs, it's about boosting productivity and making sure that every part of the country can thrive. And I don't know if you were in the hall for Rachel's speech just now, and she was talking about transport investment, and as she announced the different things that we're investing in, you could hear different parts of the hall applauding and shouting their approval. And that's because one of the things that we've been really keen to do is to make sure that we're getting transport investment in every part of this nation. Because for too long, transport investment has been focused on those places that are overheating, rather than focusing on the regenerative power of transport infrastructure and investing in transport. And I thought it was kind of a really obvious way of showing that when we talk about rebalancing, when we talk about spreading growth to every part of the country, that's what we're managing to do. And of course, it's about what transport enables. It is about reducing costs for business. It's about opening up access to education, to skills and employment, as well as, improving people's lives. It means you can go and see family and friends. It means you can go to a gig or a theatre production somewhere further away from home if there's good transport to get you there. And of course, we're doing this against a backdrop of missed opportunities and chronic underinvestment. HS2 was an amazing project, but the Tories allowed it to be, they've allowed half of it to be scrapped, and as an MP in the East Midlands, I feel that very keenly. But also, they've allowed it to get massively over cost and beyond schedule. But local transport really bore the brunt of austerity, with hundreds, probably thousands of bus routes cut, and we're changing that. We are investing in transformative infrastructure, not cutting corners. Now, I could talk a lot about all the other missions, because I will briefly, if you'll allow me. So our clean energy superpower mission, we know that transport is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. 29% of the UK's emissions come from transport. And if we're serious about reaching net zero, we have to decarbonise transport, and particularly road transport. And that means cleaner vehicles, it means greener fuels, and it means creating a charging network that works for everyone out there. And we are making real progress. 85,000 public charge points now across the UK, and 1 million households have access to charging at home. And of course, we've invested in supporting that transition to electric vehicles. It's not just good for the planet, important as that is, it's good for consumers, it's good for industry, it's good for our energy security, and it's good for growth. We're also backing the decarbonisation of maritime, and of course through the SAF mandate, that Sustainable Aviation Fuel mandate, we're starting to tackle the more difficult modes when it comes to decarbonisation. And I will just mention health as well, because transport isn't just about getting people from A to B, it is about how we live. And the right infrastructure can help people to stay active, it can reduce air pollution, and it can make our roads safer. That's why we've committed over £600 million to walking and cycling infrastructure over the spending review period. And we know that that can reduce the burden on our National Health Service, it can improve public health, it can cut pollution, it can improve people's lives, it can improve what it feels like to live in your local area. Obviously, safety is a huge issue. You touched on road safety, which is one of my passions. We're working on a road safety strategy right now. There are over 1,600 people a year are killed on our roads, 29,000 seriously injured. And for over a decade, we haven't had a road safety strategy. It's been just left, which is absolutely unforgivable, frankly. And that's one of the pieces of work I'm most excited about us working on. It's good for the economy if we can cut road traffic collisions, but it's also really important because it has such a devastating impact on lives and on communities. And of course, transport is essential to opportunities. Many people, 40% of households in the lowest income bracket don't have access to a car. And that's why the money that we're investing in bus travel, the powers that we're giving to local transport authorities to take back control of their buses is absolutely critical. And of course, we've extended the £3 bus fare through to March 2027. And where we see that investment, including in places like here in Liverpool, where I know they had a young person's concessionary bus fare from quite some time ago, we can see it has a difference. You can only choose to use public transport or active travel if we create the conditions where that becomes safe and convenient. And that's what we're absolutely determined to do. So in our first year, I think we've made real progress, but we are just getting started. Our transport strategy is delivering measurable outcomes across growth, across decarbonisation, public health, safety, and social mobility, and it's changing lives every day. But I know there's a lot more to do, and I look forward to our conversation this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lillian.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll hand straight over to you, David.
I haven't got anything else to add. No.
All covered.
Yeah, done, fine, all finished. Yeah, no, for us, obviously, you hit the nail on the head there. Transport is the enabler. It unlocks everything, doesn't it, in regions. And an area like mine, which is York and North Yorkshire, heavily rural and coastal areas, the investment in the north in transport has been really poor. In investments into rural areas and coastal areas, even more so. We have many communities that we speak to who talk about the weekly bus, you know, and it's just like, that's just shocking, quite frankly, in this day and age. So just in terms of sort of where we are as a combined authority and merits of our responsibility obviously around transport, we are being slightly left behind, unfortunately. Some of the non-core city regions, so mine, Hull and East Yorkshire, Great Links, I'm not too concerned about those areas. But for me, it's very much like we need to have that priority on transport investment. an area like mine shouldn't be missed out on opportunities for investment into transport as core city regions are. Just an example, Tees Valley gets about £1 billion. We get about 97 million, so about a tenth of what they get in the Tees Valley. You know, circa about £1,400 per person in Tees Valley, whereas us is about £116. So that disparity is really big. And when an area is as large as mine, which is 5 times bigger than London, 3 times bigger than Luxembourg, it's connect people up is so vital, and it's not just about the growth of the economy, it's getting people to education, for example. Some of our young people attend York College, they come from the very top of the county, it takes them nearly 2 hours, you know, and to travel that far, and then obviously they have to then go home as well. So it's about how we move people around the region in a much more sustainable way, but we need that investment to be able to deliver on that. The work that people like Andy and Steve have done over in Manchester and Liverpool, that joined-up approach to how they work on transport, having that long-term transport investment, has shown the economic boom and opportunities that you've seen in Manchester, Liverpool, has come from that enable element of transport, which is why Mayor Coppard and me, Oliver, and Tracy all came together to sign the White Rose Agreement to work cross borders, because even though I don't understand why someone would want to leave York and North Yorkshire, but some people like to leave York and North Yorkshire and go to South and West Yorkshire. So actually creating those really, you know, borderless transport connectivity in the wider Yorkshire is really, really important, because for, say, us, if you're in New York, a lot of people go to Leeds, Harrogate to Leeds, Selby to Doncaster. So it's no longer about looking at our own areas, about how we move people around. It's really that pan area, that pan regional area. So driving investment into the wider piece of Yorkshire is going to have a really positive impact in communities like ours. So on rail, you know, we are looking to, you know, some kind of, I say relatively simple. Nothing in transport is simple. There are no quick wins. Everyone keeps saying these quick wins. I'd love to know what these quick wins are. But for us in particular, it's how we join up the coast, for example. So we're looking at how we put half-hourly trains on between York and Scarborough. Now, half-hourly trains doesn't seem that you know, that sort of outside of the world thinking, but something like that, what that would do to open up that whole rail corridor, all of a sudden it connects that whole corridor into the growth opportunities, the housing opportunities, connecting people on there. All of a sudden it becomes a really sustainable investment proposition and really growing the economy and connecting people to opportunities. Something that we are really pleased with, which we got from government, was a rural bus franchising pilot. And we've seen how bus and franchise has been delivered again, you know, in places like Manchester and Liverpool, others who are going down that journey. But that's not a blueprint that can be rolled out and go delivered everywhere else. In, say, a York City region-wide, maybe, you could see a franchising model, but in the middle of the moors, it's just not the same proposition. So we're working really close with government now to understand what a franchising bus model would look like in a rural context, because now we have 3 mayors representing very rural areas. From next year, you have 6 more. And if we want growth and opportunity and houses being built and all these things which we have to have, it has to happen outside the core city regions. It has to happen in areas like mine as well. So we're developing on that. But little things like we managed to keep the £1 bus fare cap for all under 19-year-olds across York and North Yorkshire. So that's what we've been able to step in and do. And something like that, because it is expensive, and we know 25% of under 25-year-olds don't want to drive access to a car, or it's too expensive. So how we move people around in a much more sustainable way is really key. We've also invested heavily into active travel. So again, we've created a fund quite recently of £4 million we're going to put into active travel provision to really improve that, and a big focus on schools. And actually so many of our journeys in the morning are for that school traffic. And we obviously want to clear the roads of cars and make the roads safer, but we also want to instill into young people that cycling and walking is a really sustainable way of traveling. It's also really fun. Like, cycling is really, really good fun to do. And so instill it into young people from a very young age, that actually to be able to connect into your school or your local community, walking and wheeling and cycling is really good to do, and instill it into young people. But again, in our region, the car is still really important. You know, we are a huge rural area. You know, I'm not going to say to anyone that you're going to have to leave your car at home for North Yorkshire. It's such a vast area. So the investment we've had into particularly the A66, which we touched on earlier on, you know, that road is an incredibly dangerous road. I think there was 12 deaths on it last year, and one in 4 vehicles on that is also freight. So investing in our road network and our road infrastructure is really important. We've had the biggest uplift in road maintenance that York and North Yorkshire has ever seen from the Labour government last year, which is again really fantastic to see. But it's also looking at things like the whole charging infrastructure. There's one EV charging point in Whitby. it's just like ridiculous. It's just like, so just looking at the whole structure and around it, but a big focus on that road safety element as well is absolutely imperative. So there's a lot to do, but I think it's always really important to understand that delivering transport and connecting people in an area like mine is a very different proposition. And, it's a lot more challenging, but it doesn't mean it gets any less priority. But it's not always about how we grow the economy from it. It's how we connect people to opportunities, how we connect people to healthcare services, how we connect, all these sort of things, how we just bring people together. It's absolutely vital, but it is that enabler. You touched right on it. It's that enabler to everything else.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. And finally, Maya.
This is going to be a very boring panel because we're all in agreement here. And I kept thinking, I'll mention road maintenance, and you've talked about it, and I'll mention... So I guess the way that we think about transport at IPPR is how can we make transport safer, inclusive, affordable? How can we meet our climate commitments? And so I guess from our perspective, there's two key priorities, and they're probably not going to be a surprise: investing in local public transport, which we've been talking about, and then making sure people can get around their local area safely. So sort of walking, wheeling, cycling, and there's a few reasons for this. So the sort of things that I'm going to talk about are drawing on some research that we've been doing at IPPR over several years, drawing on modelling of transport emissions, a whole series of polling that we did, and some sort of in-depth public engagement with communities around the country. And there's a few sort of high-level points to draw out, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So I think the first thing to say, and this has sort of emerged a little bit from what you were both saying, is that transport, people, despite sort of efforts to make transport into a bit of a culture war issue, people are actually incredibly pragmatic about how they get around. They want to know that they can leave their front door and their pavements are safe, and if they need to get on the bus, there's a bus that gets them to where they need to go. And if they need to drive, the roads feel safe. And if they're walking to school, if their kids are walking to school, they're not worried about their kids on the road. And it's pragmatic, really, and it's about what makes sense for people, for the journeys that they're making, rather than it being a deeply held, I'm a driver, I'm a cyclist. People are pretty pragmatic, really. And so I guess what this brings us to is that we need to make sure that we're sort of meeting people where they are. And so the reason that we think local public transport and the sort of active travel piece is so important are for exactly the reasons that you've both talked about. So it's about connecting people to opportunity, particularly in rural areas, but actually most cities around the country, you can't necessarily get a bus to where you need to go to. So are you able to get to where you need to go, and are you able to access health, education, work, whatever it is? The climate piece here is really important. We know that transport is the single largest emitter by sector in this country. There's a really important need to reduce those emissions. The EV transition is part of that. But actually, the way that we like to think about the sort of transition in transport is about giving people choice. So if you want to drive, you can drive an EV. But if you don't want to drive, are there the options available to you so that you can get to where you need to go in the way that makes the most sense? There's a growth piece here. So colleagues, and I don't know if they're in the room, have done a big piece of work looking at green manufacturing in this country, and there's a real opportunity there around manufacturing for the green transition around transport. But then also, if people can't get to work, then there is a missed growth opportunity there. And the final one is around safety. So like you say, making sure that our roads are safe, making sure that people feel like it's safe for their children to walk to school or for their kids to cycle. And this sort of links to the point that you made about road maintenance. So we tend to think about potholes as being for drivers, but actually it's not very safe to cycle on a road that has potholes. There's a piece about pride in place and making sure that people feel sort of proud of where they live. And so the maintenance piece is really important. And the government has, as you both have said, has already taken steps. Bus franchising is a huge opportunity for this. We're really excited. It wouldn't be a talk from a person from an NGO if we didn't make a plug for sort of continued revenue funding to make sure that mayors and sort of local transport leaders are able to make that investment in their bus networks to make sure that they can connect people to where they need to go. I think when thinking about poor provision, the rural piece is really important, but there's an interesting demographic piece as well. So are we thinking about people who have disabilities or perhaps reduced mobility? Are they able to get to where they need to go? Are we thinking about the different sorts of trips that people make? So often when we think about transport design and appraisal, we're thinking about someone commuting potentially from the suburbs into the centre of town for a job. But actually, what about the people that are taking their kids to school and they're going to look after their, an elderly parent, and then they're popping to the shops, and then maybe they're doing a volunteering and they're trip training? And are we thinking about how those people are getting around? So what are they using the transport for? And then obviously the really important piece about, is our transport accessible for people who maybe are wheelchair users or whatever that might be? The cross-borders piece is also part of that. In some of our engagement, we've been talking to people who live in rural areas or perhaps in cities who say, well, my bus pass, my senior bus pass works in the city that I live in, but I actually can't travel across borders and it doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a really important piece which comes back to the sort of accessibility and the freedom and choice. Are we making our transport systems accessible to a whole range of people? And actually, like you said, Lillian, the transport system starts when you open the door, but it almost starts before that. Can people check their timetables? Do they have accessible information so that they know how to get to where they need to go? And then I think the final point I wanted to make, there's a question sometimes about whether there's a tension between growth and reducing our emissions. And the sort of short answer to that is no, there's no tension there. And I don't even know if I want to expand on it.
We can always come to it in questions.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is about connecting people to opportunities. We know that better connected places deliver better growth. This comes to your point about connecting between cities and also within cities. I know it's a sort of old trope, but Leeds, biggest city without a tram. We know that those things drive growth, and so I think that they are a sort of greener way of travelling. So I think I think it's a bit too simple to say that those are in opposition. And I think I'm going to stop there because you guys covered most of what I was going to say.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Maya. Keen at this point to open up and invite some questions. What I'll do is I'll take 3 questions at a time so that we can get through plenty. So perhaps if we could go, Emma, to navy suit, brown top, and then directly behind with the glasses. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. James Sutton, co-director of climate action charity Possible. Lillian, a question for you, if I may. The panel has mentioned the economic benefits of reducing the impact of road collisions and the proliferation of clean-powered rail. With this in mind, would the government back a call for a national traffic reduction target, galvanising the government, business, civil society around a focus which will deliver for health, the economy and the climate?
Hi. Given that buses are the most efficient use of road space and driving is the least efficient use of road space, so it's buses, walking, cycling and way down driving, will a bus priority scheme ever be refused in order to maintain space to drive? Will you commit to a bus priority scheme never being refused in order to maintain space to drive?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the point, Lillian, you made about charge points. I think it's right to acknowledge the massive progress achieved in those 85,000 charge points, but I wanted to get all the panellists' thoughts on what is really a massive area of inequality, which is the cost of public charging, how important that is to get to grips with in order to deliver on those net zero targets.
Brilliant, thank you. So we had a question about a national traffic reduction target, one about buses as the most efficient form of road space and not refusing bus priority schemes to maintain space to drive, and one around the inequalities and the cost of public charging. Lillian, question was directed to you in the first instance, so let's come to you first, if we may.
So, I mean, I absolutely want to see people have a proper choice about how to travel. And I think that's what people want is, you know, at different points in your life, you will want to use different ways of getting about. You know, for lots of young people, they can't drive, they can't afford to drive, or they're too young to drive. For lots of disabled people, they won't be able to drive. And as I said in my opening remarks, there are lots of people who can't afford to run a car. There are lots of people who don't want to run a car. And we know that we would all massively benefit if more people were choosing active travel for those local journeys. We know far too many journeys of kind of, you know, less than 5 miles are done in a car, not because people don't want to take a different choice, but because they don't feel enabled to, either because they don't feel safe to do, or they don't feel that they're supported in terms of the infrastructure that enables them to. And it actually feeds into your question, which is about you know, public transport. Is if you've got the choice to use public transport, lots of people want to. I can make far better. I never travel down to Westminster in a car. I always use the train. Why? Because I can make much better use of my time. Now, I mean, you know, we live in a growing population where people are increasingly mobile. So I don't think we're in the position of having a target for reduction of the number of vehicles. What we want is to give people, I think, as you said, Maya, a genuine choice. If you can provide the opportunities for people be able to choose active travel for those local journeys where they're convenient, and sometimes, you know, you're dropping your kids to school and then going to do something else, or then picking them up from sports. You know, it isn't always going to be feasible to use public transport or to use a bicycle or to walk, but sometimes it will be if you can make that sufficiently convenient and safe. And I think we want to create the conditions where people can have the choice of how to travel, and they can choose to leave the car at home. And I use myself as an example, is I don't have a car. I live in Nottingham. I live, you know, not that far from the city centre. I'm in a city where we've got an amazing bus service. I can walk to my bus stop. I don't have to know what the timetable is because the buses are sufficiently convenient and affordable. But that's not true for everywhere, and that's why, you know, the powers and the funding that we've set out around the bus services bill and around the funding that we're providing to local transport authorities is so important, because it gives them the opportunity to create the sort of bus network that we need that works for their area. And I guess that comes to the second, sorry, I don't know your name, the question that you asked, which, or do you want me to talk about all three, or shall I leave buses to David?
I think David may have some things to say about public charging as well, but why don't you finish up on, on yours,
finish
and
on
then
those
your thoughts, and then we can always jump around a little bit as well.
Which is, it's not for us to sit in Westminster or Whitehall and tell local authorities what they should prioritise in their local areas. That is the whole point of devolution, is to give funding and power closer to the people who are using it. And I absolutely agree what David says. It isn't just about solutions that work for cities, for urban areas. It's about solutions that work for every area, and the solutions will be different in different places. You know your area far better than I do, so it's not for me to tell you where you should have, you know, a bus lane. I love a bus lane. It makes it far more convenient. And I mean, the reason the buses work so well in Nottingham is because we do have a lot of bus priority. So sometimes, you know, I'll be flying into town on the bus when the traffic is, you know, you can see that there's been a build-up of traffic. That's great. It really enables people and gives people a reason to choose to use public transport. But it's not for me to tell, you know, Nottingham or Mansfield or Manchester or York how to do that. That's for the local area to make those right choices. And Toby, you know, I know we agree very much about the need to expand the charging network and make it as affordable so it's equitable for everybody, can have the benefit of making that switch to an electric vehicle. And that's why one of our focuses as a government has been on reducing the upfront cost of being able to acquire an electric vehicle in the first place, and about expanding the charging network. But I absolutely understand, you know, that distinction between those who can charge at home and those who can't, and that's why we've expanded the ability for people to do cross-pavement charging, so that more people who perhaps don't have a driveway can access domestic price electricity whilst charging their vehicle outside their home.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, just on the charge bit, we've actually, as a CA, invested in further charge infrastructure because there was such a lack. And in some of our rural areas where there just isn't any, you basically just don't have the choice of having an electric car, do you? And it's not just the electricity charge, actually fuel costs, a lot of rural and coastal areas is much higher than other areas as well. So it really, you know, those areas which are quite often, you know, have deep deprivation or impoverished, they are having to pay even more for just those basic fundamentals like fuel and electricity to charge cars. So we've actually run a program where we have actually invested into more infrastructure in those rural areas and looking at what options there can be around having a shared charging point, for example, not just an individual home having one. Is there a place where we could use, say, like community halls or centres which could have charged infrastructure? So if you've, say, got a village of, say, I know 100 people all have a car and there's a charging point which has 10, instead of all the houses having to do it, they could use that same community centre. So there's lots of things we're trying to work on. And again, that comes back to we have to just do things a bit differently in my area. Take your point entirely on board. The most efficient way to move people around is on a bus or in train. Simple as that. That is it. We're doing a big focus. There's this weird, like, us versus them, isn't there? Like, I cycle quite a bit, and there's like a car versus cycle. I also drive. If we take more cars off the road, when you have to drive, the roads are quieter, you can get round quicker, there's more parking, it just makes it better. I don't understand why there's always this competition. We have a big focus on how we can move people out of cars in a much more sustainable way. We've got a big ambition to be the first net zero region in York and North Yorkshire. We think we've got a real bold ambition around it. We've just developed our route map to carbon negative, and a big focus on that is our housing stock. So we're prioritising the energy efficiency of homes, but also our transport, because we know that's also a big leader to it. So how we develop our transport infrastructure, big focus on walking, wheeling, cycling, particularly in areas like York, Harrogate, Knaresborough, Selby, which is much more accessible to move, but also in those small community villages where I live, for example, where my kids go to school, it's only 700-800 metres, but there's no crossing, there's no zebra crossing, there is no safe way to do it. So actually, here's a quick one, I found one. Just putting in a zebra crossing that costs about 10 grand, all of a sudden opens up my entire village for all the children to walk to school. You've all of a sudden take 30, 40 cars off the road. You know, it's not that hard, is it? Let's be frank. It's quite basic when you break it down to that level. But a really big focus on is how we do that. So therefore, you then are taking off the congestion. Now, where I live and where my wife works as well, we travel all over North Yorkshire. We've got 2 young children. We will probably always need some capacity at a car. I think it's just what it is. However, if we can have a big focus on giving those people the opportunities, a lot of our communities, I say they literally talk about the weekly bus. There's no opportunity for those people to use anything else other than a car. And I generally do believe people want the opportunity. So they might still use the car 2 or 3 times a week. But if you could change one of those into actually I'm walking or I'm getting the bus, whatever, it all of a sudden opens up so many opportunities. So something that we're looking at as well is where our bigger transport hubs are. So our rail stations, for example. So Ripon, which is in my patch, which is a city actually. Never tell someone from Ripon it's not a city. It's very much a city. But it hasn't got a rail station. Whereas Thirsk, which is just down the road, does have a rail station. So we're looking at a community transport offering where actually there could be a bus or a community transport, a coach type thing, that picks all people up around those villages in that area and takes them all to Thirsk where the train station is. Therefore, the onward journeys then from Thirsk can then go down to York and then onward, rather than all those people in all those different villages having to think, well, I can't get there, so I'm just going to drive all the way to York. Actually, if we can connect those people up into a bigger transport hub, then they can go from there. You're having a massive impact again. Yeah. A fairly straightforward, simple thing to do. Obviously, yes, it needs a bit of money, absolutely. But again, quite simple. You know, it's not, again, outside the box thinking here. But again, all those little wins has a huge knock-on effect onto the bigger picture. So, you know, and somewhere like Harrogate, which is where I'm from, I don't know if anyone has been to Harrogate in the last 10 years or so. The transport, the congestion in Harrogate is beyond a joke. Like, it has a massive stray, which you're not allowed to build on. You can't touch it at all. But I had to take my mum from where she lives to a hospital. It's 1.5 miles. It took us 1 hour and 15 minutes in the car to get there. And it's just like, that's just utterly ridiculous. And it's literally just congestion. You cannot move in that town. So again, we're looking at a a better, improved transport connectivity. So when people are coming into the town, can we get people into a bus network, a park and ride network that connects into Harrogate, for example? And these are the things we're exploring now. But again, it does take money. But again, that would have such a massive impact. So those who do need to drive, because not everyone can use, can walk, wheel, cycle, or can use bus provision. Some people do need to drive. Actually, how it then frees up. Some people do need to drive. They do,
if you're a tradesman driving or a tradesperson carrying stuff around in your van.
I have spoken. Yeah. It isn't many, but I have spoken to some people with severe health difficulties in York who have to have a vehicle close to them because of their health requirements that they can't take the equipment and health requirements they need onto like public transport. So it's not many. I don't deny the majority of people can use alternative transport, but some people will always want to drive as well. But you can reduce it massively. Yeah, no, absolutely there is. But there are some people who do need to as well. Very small, very small, but there are, and a transport network needs to work for everyone. Yeah, absolutely very small, but it does need to work for everyone. But a big focus on how we can take that need away. Therefore, if you do need to, it is much simpler to do, and therefore it frees up road space for walking, wheeling, cycling.
Can I ask, sorry, can we keep the...
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, let's move this on. Thank you. Maya.
I'll keep this pretty punchy. We've previously looked at reducing, on your question specifically about the charging points, we've looked at calling for a reduction in the VAT on public charges. We've also done a bit of work looking at social leasing, and I'm going to be a good community-minded citizen and plug some of the work that Possible have done around access to EVs for carers, who often are the sorts of people that do need to drive. So making sure that those journeys are done in as green a way as possible. I actually had a question, I know this is cheeky, but you mentioned about the devolution point and not wanting to sort of tell local leaders how to sort of run things. And I'd be really curious about how you avoid, you were talking about your ambitions and the risk of ending up with this sort of postcode lottery. So you have some super ambitious mayors and some less so, and like how you do the balance between sort of setting the direction of travel, but giving you guys the freedom to, I mean, I think you're right that you shouldn't be saying the bus lane needs to go here and not there, but it's just like an interesting, it's an interesting tension. I don't know the answer to that one.
I mean, I think that's inevitable consequence of devolution, is that if you give local, if you give mayors or local authorities the ability to, you give them the funding and you give them the powers, they're going to make the choices. And sometimes I might sit and look at those choices and think, well, that isn't the choice that I would make, but that is that's local democracy. And it's right that, that David's making the choices that work for York and Yorkshire. He's been elected, to do that. And I think that is the right thing to do. And frankly, we wouldn't make the right choices from the centre because we don't know the circumstances that as well as that you do for your area. And inevitably that does mean that there will be variation between places and there'll be places where we look at what they've done and we're not, and it isn't what I would do, but I'm afraid I think that's inevitable.
It's just, if I can touch on that, it's also a slightly wider piece as well. So as CAs, we look across so many different areas. So it's not just transport, it's housing, it's skills, it's where employment places are going to be coming up. So it's actually filtering that all in. So if we know that we're looking at a new housing development or we're developing an MOD site, whatever it may be, we know it's going to be over there, we need to be factoring that transport in with it. So we're not just building dormant towns or new housing that is straight away requiring on a car. If we know that we are developing, say, half-hourly trains to York Scarborough, we know all of a sudden that opens up so many brownfield housing developments, which is then directly linked in the transport, rather than potentially government traditionally, which is definitely moving away from it now, looking at transport strategy, a housing strategy. So we can actually go, okay, we want to be developing this area. What is the transport needs and ask requirements of that, and actually filtering that at the same time and developing those plans in hand in glove.
I do think we have a big role in government, though, in supporting capacity. So when you think about something like Active Travel England, it isn't just about directing funding, it is about supporting local authorities to have the capacity to use that effectively. And I think we also have a really important role as conveners and spreaders of good practice. So if one area have tried something and had the opportunity to do what, then they want to share that with other local authorities, so other mayors can kind of look, all right, I like what you did there, how could I make it work in my local area? So I think we can be real enablers without being directive.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll open up to a few more questions. So we'll take three. So there, sorry. Lady in the headscarf. And then we'll go to person in the black jacket with the glasses. Can you see where I'm pointing with the purple top? Yeah. And then right at the back, gentleman with the hand raised on the corner. Yeah, lovely.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Eleanor from Cycling UK. It was really good to hear so much talk about active travel today. Sometimes it gets missed out when we're talking about transport. Cycling UK has got a campaign at the minute, My Ride, Our Right, which is about women's safety, particularly. Women cycle far less than men, and one of the key reasons that they cite is safety concerns, real or perceived. With the road safety strategy coming up, I just wondered how you would be addressing that issue of safety, particularly for active travel, so for walking, wheeling and cycling, and also particularly for women, because they do still make the bulk of like school runs and shopping trips and some of these other like domestic journeys. So how can we improve it for them so a lot of those new journeys can be unlocked as active travel journeys?
Thank you so much. So my name's Alice Pleasant. I work for Lime. So Lime e-bikes, e-scooters, shared mobility. So keeping on the cycling theme, I'm really keen to hear the panel's views on shared mobility, how we grow it in the UK and the role it plays in transport connectivity. We're really looking to expand across the UK into new towns and cities. And yeah, we're really keen to sort of hear.
Hi, Tim Morris, Associated British Ports. Guess what this question's going to be about? We haven't mentioned the role of transport hubs, for example, seaports, as engines of jobs, growth, investment opportunity in their own right. And I just wondered whether the panel had a view on whether that kind of role and that kind of catalytic capacity of transport hubs is sufficiently recognised in transport policy, or should it be somewhere else?
Brilliant. What a fantastically broad array of questions we've got there. One on women and cycling safety, one on shared mobility, and one on transport hubs as engines of jobs. Who'd like to go?
I'll take a couple of, so active travel, absolutely right. So much why people don't is because they don't feel safe, perceived to be safe, whatever it may be. I know I cycle with my children quite a lot, and when we're in my village, they kind of feel safe because the roads are a lot quieter, whereas as soon as we go into like a more concentrated area, they really don't feel safe. They get like, absolutely terrified. I went to Ghent in Belgium a couple of years ago to look at their transport work there, and I went around with the mayor for 3 days solid. We cycled about 35 miles. We stopped at one red light. Even when they were doing road improvements, they would literally close it off to cars, but cycles, you could just keep going. It flowed so well. And just that, it's more the perceived sense of safety, but it really, you just felt safe because, say, the roads were quieter, but there was a collective behind us because so many people were doing it as well. And it's not always about infrastructure. We've spoken to Active Travel England quite a lot of this. It's not necessarily about putting in a cycle lane. So much about it is the work around. So the perceived safety of it, working a big focus on schools, which is where we're focusing our active travel starting off from. So the large fund we've created actually is focusing on those school trips. So mums and dads who are cycling, and then young people, so they are engaged with cycle from a very early on age, and then we can build it out from there. And sort of, but we have to start somewhere effectively. So we're starting that, but making sure that it's a big community voice piece we're doing. So we've got a fund out for of £4 million, and it's very much geared towards community groups and organisations who are working in York and North Yorkshire, in and around cycling and walking, wheeling, and how we can support them. So it's very much community groups coming to us, advocating for what they want to see. So I think when we're developing policy, it's making sure that it is engaging with all people, so making sure that it is accessible for all people, and particularly on the safety element. So we've got a really big focus on that. On the shared mobility stuff, York did for some time have a really good scheme going on. And again, going back to Ghent, my focus on having a shared mobility though, and using it was a lot more focus on bikes though actually. A lot of them were mopeds and scooters, and I actually feel that a lot of people didn't feel comfortable using those because they're quite quick and it's a bit unusual, whereas a bike, whereas in York, a lot of the focus was actually on the actual mopeds and scooter things. I think the pickup would have been a lot greater if there's a much more focus on bike. And again, in Ghent, that's kind of what they did. They went very much down using bikes rather than using mopeds, because electric scooters, because I think people just didn't feel as comfortable using them. I had a day, I mean, I've got terrible balance anyway, I was all over the place, but you know, like riding a bike, I think it's just a bit more accessible to people. So I'd say I think they've got a great offering, particularly in a sort of the more densely populated area. I think there's a really good take-up at the university, actually, and actually because so many people at the university live out of the campus and are travelling in, and there's a really big take-up with students. But I think if they're going to come in, I agree, I think they're a really good opportunity, but more of a focus on the bike element rather than the scooter mopeds, because I just don't think people feel as supportive on it. On the ports, Transport for the North, we've actually been talking a lot more around actually ports and I don't think there's really been a particular focus on it from how important it is in terms of transport infrastructure on freight in particular, and actually now Transport for the North having a much more push on actually the role of ports and what they play in. I don't have a lot of expertise on ports personally, but I know it is much more an emphasis. If it sits in transport, if it sits in sort of business and trade, I'm not sure on that piece. Probably kind of sits along a lot because obviously it's a big part of the open up our business and freight and economy, but it's definitely a much more of an important part that is being talked about at that level, definitely for sure.
All right, back to me. Well, let me pick up the cycling point first, and obviously it's great to see you, Eleanor, and look forward to meeting you in Cycling UK to talk more about women's safety. I mean, I think when we think about the road safety strategy, it's right that we think about it in terms of the safe system. So it is about looking at different aspects of how do we make our roads safer. So how do we build safer roads? How do we think about the engineering of our roads? How do we think about the vehicles that are on our roads and the potential to make vehicles safer? And obviously, more modern vehicles have, can have safety features within them to make it safer for them being around cyclists and pedestrians. Obviously, there's a big piece around enforcement, which again, if people are not following safe ways of behaving on our roads, there need to be consequences around that. We know we're pretty clear on some of the things that cause poor safety records. For speeding is a feature in more than 50% of road traffic collisions. So action to tackle speeding effectively is really important. But it's also about building people's confidence. And I think that's why, it's really great to see Alice from Lime, is it's opened up the opportunity for cycling to many more people. And you only had to see, I mean, obviously not many of you won't have, been in London in recent weeks, but when there was the tube strikes, how many people, took to a bicycle to get about, perhaps for the first time. But there'll be lots of people who would be nervous about riding a bike, particularly if they haven't ridden a bike for a long time. And there are some fantastic organisations, I think about in my own city with RideWise or Women in Tandem, about getting people, and particularly women or groups who perhaps wouldn't normally cycle, is giving them the confidence to cycle. And there's a lot to be said for safety in numbers. Get more people cycling. I mean, I've seen, not just in London, but there are other, major European cities where there's been a big focus on improving cycling, both the infrastructure, but also just getting more people out on a bike, because then it becomes more the norm, and it affects, and obviously it is also about the behaviours of other road users. And I think there's much more that we can do in that area. On ports, I think, thank you for raising that, because I think it also makes us think, that this isn't just about individuals and passengers, it is about freight. Absolutely critical for the movement of goods around our country, and needing to make sure that goods can get from our ports to the places that they need to be. And of course we need to think about that in an integrated way, because there's different ways in which you can have first and last mile, that part of it, and how can you do the long distance bits in between, and particularly how can you enable more movement of freight by rail, and then more movement of the last mile by by cargo bikes, for example, or by electric vehicles. So I think thinking about how do we how do journeys happen end to end? Obviously, that's an important part of our integrated national transport strategy, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, we're working on. And ports is a really important part of that and needs to be part of that conversation.
Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'm not sure I have got
no,
that
that's
much
fine.
to add, to be
Well,
honest.
then that gives us a bit more time for a couple more questions. So, just to your right there to start with. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, that would be yes, please. Yeah. Sorry, yes. I go. Why don't we do? Yeah, that lady there. Then just next row along and one in, and then finally right at the back there with the one hand at the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rhian and I work for Cymru Wledig LPIP Rural Wales. So the LPIP is a local policy and innovation partnership, and it's UK government funded, draws together universities, voluntary sector, businesses, range of experts to try and find solutions, do research into the issues that affect devolved regions or countries within the UK. And obviously I'm from the Welsh one. And one of the, unsurprisingly, with our focus on rural Wales, one of the key issues that comes up very regularly is public transport. So I was particularly interested in what David said about some of the solutions or ideas that you have. And a lot of our research work at the moment is being done on these topics about linking public transport. My question now is, to get from Wales, to get around Wales, very often you have to go into England and then back in. So whereas transport is a devolved topic, it's also kind of not, because you can't just get off your bus or train and then hop back on somewhere else. You have to cross borders in order to get places. So obviously the Labour CNF is talking to the government. The changes don't seem to have been happening as quickly as people would have liked. But also I wondered, so that was, I guess, the first part of my question is, what can we be doing to bring that dialogue to produce more rapid changes? But secondly, that is with a Labour government currently in Wales. Now, it doesn't look as if that's going to be the case after next year's Senedd elections. So would that potentially lead to any changes to public transport and the impact in rural areas?
Thank you. David Milner from Create Streets. With a lot of the transport decisions coming down to cost-benefit analysis in the appraisal process, what more can we do on the B side and the benefit side to capture active travel, to capture public transport, trains and trams? And then I guess on the C side, the cost side, yes, there aren't necessarily too many quick wins, but we do make it very expensive to build that side roads, Pelican Crossing for certain regulations. And also, you know, we have the our tram network's twice as expensive as the rest of Europe. So what can we do on that side as well to help sort of mayors deliver this?
Thank you. Esme from Transport East. We represent a region that has a third of our population in rural areas. And I recognise a lot of the challenges and solutions that David's been proposing. Do you think central government is paying enough attention to the challenges and opportunities that are within rural areas and the solutions that can come forward?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So a question on the need and challenges of cross-border and cross-party dialogue to expedite change and reflections on that. The cost benefit with an emphasis on both of those sides of the coin, and appraisal process of active travel. And then finally, the challenge for rural areas and central government's attention on that. Maya, if I come to you first, because I know you have done some work on, particularly on the active travel cost benefit piece, although feel free to comment on the other questions as well.
Thanks for the question. It's a tricky one. I think the sort of Green Book review that government did recently, it was looking at how we measure costs and benefits, and particularly thinking about the benefits and the sort of non-monetizable benefits. I think there's an interesting tension when you look at like big investment decisions, and I'm not really thinking about active travel here, but you mentioned sort of trams. There are three parts, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, there's sort of three parts. There's the cost-benefit analysis, the sort of appraisal piece, there's the strategic business case, and then there's the politics. And there are examples of schemes with positive cost-benefit analysis, a tram in Leeds being one of them, that hasn't been approved. And so my sense is that we can spend a lot of time thinking about how we measure and monetize the benefits. But if there isn't the political will behind getting it done, then it's not going to get done. Maybe that's me being a little bit cynical, but I think that there has been lots of thinking about how you capture the monetizable benefits from these sorts of investments. We know, and I'm going to forget all of the statistics, but we know that like return on investment in active travel is really high. We know that there are benefits to health. We know that there are benefits to air, health, both in the physical activity and in the reduction in air pollution. We know how to sort of, health economists have done that modeling, and we still don't necessarily see these schemes being approved. So I think there probably is something to be done on making sure that those benefits are being properly captured. On the costs, your comment about the sort of zebra crossing piece feels like it sort of captures it quite well, really, is that like actually in a combined authority budget that isn't that much, could it be reduced? Are there ways that we could be implementing those in ways that are cheaper? What would that look like? How could we do that in a way that feels safe? Because we know that local authorities have very stretched budgets. So yeah, I don't know if I have an answer, but mostly to say I agree with you that I think there are ways that we could be streamlining, particularly the small interventions, like a zebra crossing, say, that could mean that we could get them rolled out more rapidly and make roads safer, based like what you were saying on the previous question. Just very briefly, if I may, on the rural transport piece, we did a piece of work looking at rural transport in Scotland, and the sort of conclusion that we came to is that if you can get rural transport right, then you should be able to get it right everywhere, but it is hard because those routes are often, particularly bus routes, those are not going to be profitable. And there is an opportunity there with franchising. I mean, I guess watch this space, the work that you're doing there, but because you'd be able to sort of cross-subsidize those routes with more profitable routes elsewhere in the sort of franchise system, in theory.
Or within an area have multiple franchise models, if that makes sense. So you could maybe have a citywide franchise model for York, but then into the more rural areas, you might have a different sort of model that maybe more like an EP Plus or an enhanced partnership type model. So there's many ways to skin a cat, I suppose is what I'm saying on that. But as you say, in some of our rural areas, a full franchise model financially would just cripple absolutely everything. It would cost, some of our routes we know would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to run. It's just not financially viable at all, unfortunately.
No, exactly. And I think one of the things that we were thinking about when we did the rural work is thinking about transport hubs. So are there places that mean that people haven't got to go either cross a border or all the way into a city and then back out again? Are there, towns or villages that can be used as sort of smaller style hubs? And then I was really pleased to hear you mention community transport, because there's also a really important role, particularly in rural areas, for thinking about how community transport can plug some of those gaps.
Well, then straight onto you, David. I think, reflections on the sort of rural element as your area covers that, but also on that kind of cross-border working would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on a bit there. So there is a community-owned bus in Halls, actually, in a village, and the local community own a bus, and then they also own a local shop as well. And this community bus is you literally phone up and it comes and picks you up. And in a very Asian population area, this bus will literally drive people, outside their house and take them back in again. And so when we're thinking of our franchising model and what we're exploring, how can we factor in those kind of things into the wider piece? Because we know there's not going to be one size fits all, but a community-owned bus operator, these small charity organisations that do a lot of great work in our region, we need to factor all that as well. On the cross-border stuff, it's really important. That's why I don't know about sort of crossing from, Wales into England. But in terms of what we're looking to do around our transport connectivity, that's so much what we're focused on is outside of our own borders, actually making sure it is joined up and a lot more. You know, I mean, when you're travelling, you don't care or realise you've all of a sudden crossed the border. You just want the transport to be able to work and have that integrated system. And it's absolutely vital, and that's where putting the customer and the person using it at, you know, at the heart of what we're trying to do. And, you know, it's where you have that political buy-in needs to come in, the political want to do it, that working. And I'm worried politically going forward, potentially, what the drive would be around potentially investing in transport and prioritising public transport and the work, you know, we're doing as a government now with prioritising, you know, nationalising rail and investment into bus is absolutely amazing, and we need to do absolutely so much more. But just on like investing in transport in the north, for example, we've heard Reform coming out saying that they don't want to, you know, looking at any larger investment in rail, for example. Well, that's just ridiculous. In an area in the north where we're already struggling to get investment, we've been massively left behind. You've got politicians on the other side saying it isn't, you know, required, we don't want it, you know, so it's just ridiculous. So we're in a privileged situation now with Labour and the government and us as mayors who are really looking to drive so much more into transport. We've got to make the most of it really now and drive it forward, because then people will reap the benefits of it as well, because we all know that a much improved transport infrastructure, you know, rail, active travel, bus, everything is such a positive. It's such an enabler. It's going to open up so many opportunities for so many people. Kind of touches back onto the investment piece where, you know, the whole appraisal of the Green Book, which is, I never thought I'd be talking so much about an appraisal of a Green Book in my life. It's incredibly heavy going, but you've just got to factor in so many more elements of it, the social value, the health outputs of more people walking with, it's like of the greener air, the impact it's got on the environment. All those things need to be factored in. Unfortunately, large investments into infrastructure in a place like mine, or particularly on the coast, the numbers don't add up. You know, you've got to have a lot of political will, but the numbers, unfortunately, just don't add up a lot of time. Whereas that same investment into, say, Leeds and in between, say, Liverpool and Manchester or in London, always makes financial sense because you're hitting so many more people. Whereas in a coastal area, for example, half the business case is in the sea. So it isn't as financially viable. But you throw in things like the health outcomes, the health improvements, that social value, taking people to education. You've got to factor so many more things in it to make those things much more financially viable. It can't just be done on, it ticks a box on return of investment, because transport is like the enabler to the housing agenda we want to do. It's the enabler to the future growth we're going to see. Transport literally underpins it all. And if we see it in a very black and white, it's going to return this much money, it's just going to be the same places that get improved and the same areas will get left behind, unfortunately. So I'm really proud that the government are really addressing that as a thing and really factoring so many more factors into it rather than just return on investment as a monetary thing. Because if we're going to live a life like that in society like that, we're never going to achieve very much as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time. What I might do is I might ask just Maya and David to make closing remarks, and then I come to you, Lillian, and you can just wrap up on any thoughts you had on those questions and then make your final closing remarks as well, if that's okay. Maya, do you have any closing thoughts? We've covered a lot today.
Oh gosh, yeah, I was just trying to think how I'd like sum this all up. I guess, gosh, what would I make a plea to? We've covered so much. I guess a reflection that the government has already made some really positive steps, the sort of bus franchising, the commitment to active travel, the investment that we've already seen. And I guess I'm sort of excited to see where you and your colleagues sort of take that and run with it in your local areas. Maybe I'll just leave it there. Over to you.
That's a nice note. A note of excitement is a nice note to end on.
Yeah, I just echo that really. I think the energy around improving transport, what Heidi has brought to recently about nationalising rail and the focus heavily on buses and massive focus on active travel. We're in a really good place. Government clearly want to massively improve this, invest in it, and see mayors as the way to go and do that. My only plea as always is just making sure we have that parity. Making sure that the non-core city regions get that parity so we can see the opportunities that can be opened up and unlocked with great and fantastic public transport, which we're already seeing. We just need more.
Excitement, energy. coming back to your opening remarks, David, and lots to do, as you said at the very beginning. Lillian, if you'd like to speak to the themes that emerged in those final questions, but also end us with your closing remarks as well. That would be fantastic.
It feels like quite a tall order, but I'll do my best. So I think one of the things that came out from that final round of questions was about the importance, it was about the importance of rural areas. And that recognition that not everywhere is the same, and what works in a rural area might not be the same as what works in an urban area. And then you kind of touched on, well, what would be the impact of, of the forthcoming Senate elections? Obviously, I'm very hopeful that we will win those elections. But, obviously we've had the county council elections this year, and obviously Reform made great headway in some places, and perhaps their commitment to public transport or to active travel has not been the same as it's been in Labour authorities. And I think what I'd say in broad terms is that we need to spell out those political choices, is that transport probably isn't people's number one priority generally. It's going to come behind the NHS or cost of living. And, it's a responsibility on all of us to actually get people talking about transport, about the difference it can make to communities, about the difference it can make to people's lives, and about the different choices that are on offer. So if you are serious about enabling young people to be able to have a choice about where they go to college, or to be able to have a choice about where they get a job, or if you want your mum or dad or granddad to be able to access the public services, to be able to get to their local hospital, to be able to get to the library, to be able to go out and see their friends, to tackle isolation, what are the transport choices that will allow that to happen? And I think that needs to be a feature of our discussions as part of those elections, because we are committed to investing in those things. We are committed to enabling people to benefit from public transport, from active travel. And I think the question is, well, what are the other parties offering? And so people know what they're voting for, rather than voting for it and then wondering why their bus service has been cut, or why they only have a bus once a week to their village, because it doesn't have to be that way. We can do things differently. The sort of second question I wanted was about cost-benefit analysis. And of course, the cost-benefit analysis is only ever part of the story about what happens or doesn't happen. I think the review of the Green Book's been really important in recognising it's not just about tackling the overheated parts of the country. It is about how investment in transport can be a catalyst for regeneration. And active travel generally, comes out with very high kind of benefit-cost ratio benefits. You can spend a little money and get a really big benefit. And it also tells us about the importance of thinking across government. So if we can get more people walking and cycling, and it is walking as well as cycling, it's probably the easiest route into people for active travel, albeit you can't go as far as you can or as quickly as on a bicycle. But it can reap huge benefits in terms of the health outcomes. It's the easiest way to kind of hit your 150 minutes a week of activity is to walk to the bus stop, walk to school, rather than jumping in the car. If we can kind of enable people to be able to do those things, and obviously we're working on things like the cycling and walking infrastructure strategy, the next iteration of that, we can make a really big difference to this country, not just in transport terms, but in health terms, in economy terms, and I think it's really important that we continue to work on that. And I suppose what I would say in closing is that I'm really excited about the potential that transport has to change people's lives, to change our cities, to change our rural areas. I think there's huge amounts of creativity and ideas out there, and probably everybody in this room brings incredible experience and expertise and has seen what works, and we're really keen to capitalise on that, to hear your views, to incorporate them as we kind of move forward and as we work with our mayors, with our devolved nations to ensure that we have the transport that supports the sort of Britain that we want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, indeed, a round of applause for our panel, and also thank you all very much for joining us today and for your fantastic questions as well. And with that, we'll bring the event to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take every single piece of the blame if you want me to. But you know that there is no innocent one in this game for two.